Okay, put that down. There we go. Here we go. We've got notes. Number one, World War II. All right, kind of a large event. As it says here, an event that changed the world. Okay, and tonight, the first notes here, we're going to be looking at why was it a perfect time for dictators? So throughout Europe, Asia, there was a high percentage of dictators that were in power. So we're going to look at, why that was and who were some of these individuals. So we'll figure out some of their names and the country that they controlled. Okay, some terms going back to civics review at the beginning of the year, but when it comes to dictators, two different types, authoritarian and totalitarian. And if you remember, authoritarian left some freedoms to the citizens, and a totalitarian dictator was in control of everything. Okay, and then a new term, fascism. We're going to get to that one when we get to Mussolini, and we'll talk about that a little later on in this notes. Okay. All right, so the reason that some of these dictators were allowed to come to power, or people turned to radical leaders, was because of economic struggles. In the late 20s, the early 30s, we just got out of the Great Depression. We just got out of that unit. It wasn't confined to the United States. It was a global depression. So a lot of areas around the globe felt the impact of that depression. And when that happened, people become desperate. Some people start to, turn to more radical leaders who are promising a return to glory, a return to a better life, that they're going to fix things, that they're not going to let anybody get in their way. Also, we see some struggling democracies around the world during this time. And then lastly, the Treaty of Versailles. And the Treaty of Versailles is the treaty that ends World War I, if we remember. And in Europe, particularly in Germany, right, they feel that they were treated unjust by that treaty, that, they were punished for a war that they don't really feel they should have been completely blamed for, that it wasn't really their fault. They didn't start the war, but yet they're the ones that were, had to take the blame and forced to pay back, billions of dollars that they just couldn't pay back. So another reason. Okay, our first one. This gentleman is Joseph Stalin, and he is the dictator of Russia. Okay, he takes over. We mentioned the Russian Revolution in World War I, and Vladimir Lenin taking over. Well, when Lenin dies, Stalin grabs power. He takes control and becomes the dictator of Russia. Okay, looking at a global map, if you're a little unsure where Russia is, there it is. It's that big country over there. Pink. Okay, so there's Joseph Stalin. All right, the next one, probably not as recognizable for many, but this is Francisco Franco of Spain. If you're unsure where Spain is, there it is. Nice arrow. Franco, there he is. Okay, then we have Emperor Hirohito of Japan. Over here. And Japan's a little bit different. We'll talk about them when we get to Pearl Harbor. But Japan is an island, a mountainous region. They don't have a lot of natural resources. So a lot of World War II, they're out there trying to gain land, to gain these resources that they need to become this big world power. And we're going to see when they start doing this, the U.S. places some sanctions on Japan, not allowing oil and the things they need to be, a world leader, to grow their army and such. And that's a lot of the reason they become upset with the United States. All right, here's Benito Mussolini of Italy. All right, put him on the map. There's Italy. Mussolini. All right. And Mussolini installs something called fascism, which essentially is just extreme national pride. in your country, feeling that you are better than everybody else. Okay, that your nation, your people are the best. Okay, he also has a group of people known as the Black Shirts. Now, the Black Shirts are like a secret police, if you will, maybe not so much secret, but they're there to enforce. And when we learned about dictators in that civics unit, we know that there's two shuns: intimidation and manipulation, used by dictators, and the Black Shirts were part of that intimidation. So if you were speaking out against Mussolini or his government, the Black Shirts, if they found out about this, they would find you, and oftentimes there would be physical violence. Sometimes maybe they drag you in the streets, right, for everybody to see. Like, look what happens when you speak out against our government and Mussolini. It doesn't turn out well for you. So the Black Shirts were his way to intimidate those in Italy. So Mussolini comes to power after World War One. Okay, he does do some good. You're going to get a lot more of like a lot of these European dictators next year in world history, but we're just going to briefly mention them. Well, we'll actually talk quite a bit about Stalin when we get to the Cold War, but Mussolini, not so much. But anyway, so here we go. Mussolini did some good for Italy. He did when he took power. He did help their economy. He did, through fascism, instill some national pride, and he did keep control of the Mediterranean Sea. All right, and our last dictator, probably the most recognizable figure out of all of these dictators, okay, and that would be Adolf Hitler of Germany. So let's take a peek at Hitler. First, where's Germany? There it is. Okay, there's Hitler. Goes right there. All right, so a little bit about Hitler, like why he was able to come to power. We know now, looking back, that he was a very brutal dictator. He killed millions of people, right? We're going to learn about the Holocaust. We know he was very racist in his views. How does an individual like this come to power? Why would people turn to somebody like this? How does that happen? So, partly because of the economy in the 1920s. The economy in Germany actually hits a depression way earlier than everybody else because they're forced to pay back the reparations or that money from the Treaty of Versailles. So they're trying to pay back the money and they can't. And their economy tanks in the 1920s. It's not going well at all. And people literally, they're running out of money. They're food is scarce. Life is not good. And Hitler works his way up through the Nazi party. He hears of the party, he joins the party, and he kind of slowly works his way up the party ranks, and eventually uses, much like Mussolini had his Black Shirts, the Nazis have their Brown Shirts, okay, which are used to intimidate and kind of enforce the views of the Nazis. So the economy is going bad, and they seize on the Treaty of Versailles and just keep harping on how they're being unfairly punished by that treaty, and that it's not right, and that the Germans, shouldn't be punished, that they're this great nation that needs to return to glory. And then democracy. They're pointing to the fact that democracy is failing. That look around the globe, right? Depression has set in. In places like the United States, if that's the place that's supposed to be this great democracy, life in the United States in the early 1930s is not good. So pointing out that, hey, maybe democracy doesn't really work. Okay, so the Nazis, if you're unfamiliar with the Nazis, the swastika becomes their symbol. So anytime we see that, we know it's part of the Nazi party. Okay, Nazi soldier there, moving on. Okay, so a little background on Hitler. Born in Austria. Okay, hated the Jews. He had this extreme dislike for the Jews, and he blames a lot of the financial problems on the Jewish people. He blames a lot of the loss in World War I on the Jews for not contributing equally, and he just feels like they're the ones. They become the scapegoat for Hitler. They're the ones to blame for all the problems. He's also not a huge fan of communism. Okay, so we're gonna we'll talk a little bit in class when Hitler's rise to power. He's going to blame the communists as well for some of the things that happened. So We'll talk about that a little later on. Actually, we might talk about it in just a minute here. But in 1914, Adolf Hitler joins the German army, and he does fight in World War I. He is injured, but he survives. He lives. And in 1919, he joins the National Socialist Party that becomes the Nazi Party. And soon, right, he works his way up through the ranks and becomes the leader of this party. I got a little photo there zipping right through here. Getting kind of long-winded. Okay. In 1923, he is arrested for treason. Okay? He's arrested for treason, and he's given 5 years in prison. So he goes to jail, right? And he writes a book in prison, and his book is called Mein Kampf. Translates to My Struggle. Okay, and the book I've never read it, but from what I've heard, it's not very good. It's not like an interesting book. But what the book does is it outlines his plan for the Nazi Party. So he's essentially saying, here's what I want to see happen, with Germany. This is what I want the Nazis to do. So it's like a blueprint of his ideas and his plans. Okay, there's some copies, and you can find this book. It's around. You can go to what's our bookstore there? BAM. I'm sure you could go into BAM and find a copy of this if you were so inclined. Hey, and that's the end. Look at that. Look at that. Notes 1, already done. So once again, looking at why was it a perfect time for dictators, right? It boils down to really the economics of the time. People just, some forced literally starving and willing to turn to more radical leaders, failing democracies, things like that going on the global level that allowed some of these dictators to come to power. So, very good. That's it for notes number 1. Get out of here. See you tomorrow.